Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow good stories. Episode recap. After realizing that her meeting with Halid was nothing more than a setup, a trade deal between Fiore and Halid, Lacey hid a knife behind her back, preparing for the worst and to protect herself. With her head bowed, staring down at the table, Lacey muttered, "And here I thought the madam was one to keep her promises." At this point, Halid looked at her with a puzzled expression, clearly clueless about what she was trying to convey. Just then, Lacey lifted her gaze and asked him, "How much did it cost you?" Half unsure, Halid replied, "I think I offered as much as I could." Hearing this, Lacey grew even more irritated. She crossed her arms, raised an eyebrow, and responded, "Of course you did." Inwardly, Lacey was thinking, that's not surprising, considering he's filthy rich. "I arrived at the port earlier than planned, but Fiore's men were already there waiting for me. I thought it was all about money, but it was clearly just a ploy to get me on that ship." Her fists clenched at the thought. Halid, noticing her mood, cleared his throat and remarked, "Things seem to have gotten a bit awkward." Lacey shot back, "Is that how people from Arena describe this kind of situation, awkward?" Unfazed, Halid replied, "I think so." She retorted, "Well, in Weldon, we call it getting conned." She frowned deeply. Finally, Halid began to catch on, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Are we talking about the same thing?" "I think you're mistaken, Abu," but Lacey wasn't interested in listening. She assumed Halid was avoiding the truth from the start. With her hands on the table, anger boiling inside, she figured Halid treated her this way because she'd been too lenient with him. How could a professional like her not see through him? She took a step forward, closed the distance, and quickly planted a kiss on his lips, leaving him utterly confused. Halid gripped the chair tightly, holding himself back. Meanwhile, Lacey felt victorious, thinking she'd read him right, that he was a flirt with an extremely sharp sixth sense. He didn't shy away from her initiative, yet he also had no intention of surrendering control. Halid suddenly stood up and passionately kissed her back, his hand resting on her waist. Lacey was confident that she had him hooked, but what surprised her was, how is he such a good kisser? He made her lose herself in the kiss. Her face flushed as he took a break, only to catch his breath before diving in again. Anyone watching might think he'd been holding back for ages. The two of them, faces red, hearts racing, no matter what. He clearly liked her, at least. That's what she believed. Realizing she could use him to her advantage, Lacey put the knife down on the table. Halid finally broke the silence. "Weren't you about to say something?" Lacey shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "You said I was free to dodge your question, didn't you?" This made Halid chuckle. As she turned to leave, Lacey called back over her shoulder, "Shall we get back to discussing the contract?" "Now's not the time to be swept away by emotions." "Contract?" Halid asked, looking genuinely perplexed. Lacey replied with a calm smile, "You hired me, remember? It's all part of the process. Don't forget, we're in this together now." In the bathroom, Simone's voice rang out. "What? A contract?" Halid felt a bit annoyed, as Simone had been asking the same question over and over. Simone, however, was visibly distressed. "But Your Highness, the princess consort isn't just temporary. She will be tasked with ruling Suryev and protecting Irina alongside you in the future. What happens once the contract ends? Will you let her go?" Simone Yelsaka, the commander of the Nefthether and Halid's right-hand man, was clearly concerned. Halid responded calmly, "Well, no." Simone's voice, still echoing from the treetops, came back. "Then what are you?" But Halid quickly reminded him, "Keep your voice down, Simone. What will you do if she hears you?" Realizing he might have been a bit too loud, Simone glanced around, hoping she hadn't overheard and reassuring himself that she probably didn't understand Western language anyway. Halid rose from the bath and continued, "I just went along with what she was saying, and things sort of unfolded from there. I don't know the exact details, but it seems acting is her profession. She'll play any role flawlessly if the price is right. Veronica Hillsdale was just one of many roles she's taken on." Simone thought it was a strange arrangement. Taking the towel Halid offered him, Simone voiced his opinion. That's all very fascinating. But how did that lead to you signing a contract with her?" Halid, equally puzzled, replied, "I can't tell what she's thinking, so I figured I'd accept her offer." Simone, disbelieving, shouted, "What?" Halid continued, unfazed. "It ties in with my goal anyway." Simone, growing exasperated, demanded, "How in the world do you figure that?" Halid chuckled. Have I mentioned how much I appreciate your honesty? Simone's face flushed. You should be saying that to the princess consort. Halid burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, you're right. It's time to come clean. Since you're the brains here, why don't you devise a solution to this dilemma? The ban keeps me from bringing it up directly. How am I supposed to tell her we actually met 10 years ago and made a pact? Meanwhile, Lacey was muttering to herself, did I make the right choice? Irina, it's finally sinking in. It feels so far away. The large ship continued its journey across the sea. Back on land, a prince opened the door to the prison, thinking the sea was far too dangerous to cross. Deciding he had to act, he ordered his soldiers to search every nook and cranny until they found her. At that moment, our count was hiding behind a tree, his mind full of thoughts. To the people of Weldon, Irina is a place one has to risk their life to reach. He was clearly furious that Lacey had dared to vanish without his permission. At Fiore's house, she had just turned down a client. I'm afraid we're not accepting any new contracts at the moment. The client seemed disappointed. Just as Fiore was about to suggest an alternative, her earring began to glow. Behind her, a mysterious man sat observing everything, thinking that maybe things would be better this way. Halid's ship continued to drift on the sea. Lacey walked around, finding some solace in the fact that at least no one could find her here. This is one hell of an exile, she thought. Stopping by the bed, she questioned, but why a bride of all roles? Blushing as she glanced at the bed, she remembered what had happened with Halid the other night. Anyway, she pondered, why does he seem so desperate to marry someone? Below, a small creature wagged its tail. Meanwhile, Halid was still not finished drying off. Simone, standing nearby, suggested, how about explaining everything to the princess consort after 3 days? Halid dismissed it, saying it would be pointless, but Simone remained anxious. It'll take 3 days to reach international waters, and then the ban won't apply. You could tell her about the misunderstanding, and Halid interrupted. She doesn't even remember me. If I bring up what happened 10 years ago, it'll seem like I pried into her past. She'll only end up despising me. A wave of sadness washed over Halid. Simone, worried, exclaimed, Dear Lord, how do we fix this? If the contract ends like this, then Halid cut him off. I'll have to seduce her. Simone was stunned, barely processing what he heard. Yes, I believe that's the only excuse me. He was speechless. Halid seemed serious. I'll seduce her so that she'll have no choice but to stay by my side, even after the contract ends. Simone looked horrified. Your Highness, how could you say such vulgar things? Nodding to himself, Halid replied, it won't be easy, even for someone like me. She's definitely not a pushover. Shaking his head, Simone objected, that wasn't what I meant. How do you plan on winning her heart? Halid casually answered, isn't that your job, Simone? Isn't this the kind of work you're meant to handle? Simone sighed, exasperated. I'm at a loss, Your Highness. I have no expertise in this area. Simone had never seen Halid so anxious. Halid, deep in thought, asked, Simone, do you think it's better to keep my clothes on, or should I take them off? Just as Simone took a sip of water, he spat it out, trembling at Halid's suggestion. But Halid continued, then again, if she likes bold men, she might actually prefer someone a bit more modest. Simone shouted, Your Highness, are you the prince I know? Have you been possessed? Please, don't act so rashly. You'll scare the princess consort off. Halid frowned. Do you really think so? Simone hesitated. I think so. Halid sighed, crossing his arms. You think so? Why bother giving advice if you're not sure? Simone apologized earnestly. And then Halid continued, undeterred. So, what should I do about my clothes? If the goal is to entice her. Blushing furiously at Halid's thought process, Simone pleaded for him to stop. Not impressed by Simone's constant protests, Halid demanded, stop rejecting my ideas and start acting like my right-hand man. Simone, startled, retorted, have I ever neglected my duties? Ignoring him, Halid went on, she seems to have been through so much. If only I could wipe away her troubled past. Simone gave a wry smile. There's no use holding on to the past, Your Highness. It's the future that matters. This time, Halid agreed with him. You're right. Even if she's forgotten our promise and never remembers the things we once said to each other, I'll never leave her again. Time is on my side. I'll make sure she experiences only the finest things, exquisite clothing, jewelry, whatever she desires. After all, she's my bride. In a dark dungeon, a silver-haired woman was confined. She murmured to herself, "Time is on my side. No. We'll use this as an opportunity." Lacey had dozed off in a chair, appearing to have a nightmare. Sweating heavily, she muttered, "No, don't," and then suddenly jolted awake, gasping. Realizing it was just a dream, she heard a knock at the door. She mumbled to herself, "Why is he being polite and knocking for once?" Opening the door, she was startled by who stood there and slammed it shut again. Collecting herself, she opened it once more, asking, "You're telling me the prince ordered you to stand guard outside my room while he's taking a bath?" The young man outside stammered, "Why, yes." Seeing a chance, Lacey perked up. "Well then, do you mind if I ask you some questions?" The young guard, unable to refuse, replied, "No, of course not. Please, ask away." Lacey quickly grabbed a notepad, beginning with her first question. "Compared to Weldon, what's the social standing of women in Irina like?" The young guard answered earnestly, "Oh, in Irina, couples discuss whose last name to take once they get married. It's fairly common for women to be the head of the household." Lacey pondered. "I see. That's quite different from Weldon. And will the prince be entrusted with public affairs?" At this, the young man hesitated, unsure, replying to each question with, "I'm not sure about that." Lacey began to doubt his offer to ask anything. A short while later, Halid returned. Lacey greeted him. "Good, you're back." Halid looked puzzled. "Were you waiting for me?" She motioned him over. "Come over here for a moment. It's time we finalize our contract." Hearing this, Halid frowned, sweating a bit. Lacey extended the contract toward him. Well, taking the contract, Halid thought, how is she not the least bit fazed by the fact that I just got out of the bath? As he pondered this, Lacey grew anxious, wondering if contracts existed in Irina. Finally, Halid began to read. Let's see. The following contract will be set in motion once the client and actor agree to the terms. First, the actor shall conscientiously perform the client's requested role of the foreign bride he fell in love with at first sight. Second, the client shall protect the actor's identity from the Weldon kingdom. Third, the client shall provide the actor with any information she needs, as well as financial and psychological support. Fourth, the client shall reward the actor a sum equivalent to 10,000 Weldon gold coins upon successful completion of the contract terms. This can be paid in the form of goods or a written document. Halid hesitated as he read the fifth term. Fifth, once the stated services have been completed, the client shall not seek out the actor. Sixth, the period of the contract. Lacey interrupted him. That's what I wanted to discuss with you. How long do I have to play the role of your wife? Before we get into all that, why isn't there any mention of what should happen if you fall? Halid asked, pulling up a chair and sitting down to face Lacey. Lacey confidently replied, "That will never happen." But Halid didn't let it go, staring at her intently until she reluctantly conceded, "Fine, I'll add that part in." Internally, she felt a bit disappointed, having assumed he wouldn't pay attention to such a detail. Lacey adjusted the contract, adding, "Sixth, should the actor fail to fulfill the stated terms, she shall compensate the client by doing whatever he wants." At that, Halid's face flushed red, and he had to confirm, "Whatever I want." Standing up, Lacey affirmed, "All right then, let's wrap things up. I hope the contract doesn't exceed 2 years. The longer we drag this out, the more likely we'll face issues like when I played Veronica." Halid responded, "Seems like that contract left an impression on you." Lacey explained, "If we extend this for over 2 years, people will get suspicious." "Of what?" Halid asked, puzzled. Lacey's next words made him blush deeply, "Of the fact that there's no child between us." Seeing his reaction, she wondered if she'd said something wrong. Halid waved it off, chuckling nervously, "Nothing." Arms crossed, Lacey continued, "I know that physical intimacy is inevitable once we enter a contractual marriage. It'd be ideal if we could get some contraceptive magical devices." She moved closer to Halid, emphasizing, "Just keep in mind, I have no intention of having any unprotected intimacy." "Your Highness, are you listen?" Before she could finish, Halid swiftly caught her and lifted her into his arms. "Does this mean everything's been finalized? Now that we're a married couple, shall we do what married couples do?" Lacey panicked. "No, wait, you need to sign the contract first." But Halid, uninterested in formalities, grinned, "Do whatever you want with it. I'm also going to do whatever I want from now on." As night fell, Lacey was fast asleep, while Halid sat beside her, watching her peacefully. He gently stroked a strand of her hair, murmuring, falling asleep before we could even do anything. She seemed to be having a nightmare, her face contorting as she muttered, "Aye, concerned?" Halid covered her with a blanket, thinking she must have been exhausted. She kept mumbling, "Stop," and "No, worried." Halid kissed her forehead, hoping to soothe her. The following morning, the red-haired guard Lana could be heard shouting, "Please." She knelt before Simone, urgently repeating, "Please let me see the princess consort." Lana, the head of border patrol and twin sister to Sana, was eager for an audience with Lacey. However, Simone remained firm, insisting that now wasn't the right time. Embarrassed and frustrated, Lana snapped, "Why not?" As Sana gently pulled Lana up, she continued insisting on seeing Lacey. Nearby, two other guards whispered, "I'm not surprised by her outbursts anymore. She's relentless, especially in hunting down mutants." She earned the prince's trust after the Suryev attack. The two guards were just as eager to meet Lacey. They eventually managed to pull Lana away. Sana bowed in apology. "Please forgive my sister's behavior." Simone replied kindly, "That's not necessary. We just need to have faith in her." Sana acknowledged, agreeing they should maintain proper conduct, given their roles in the royal service. Simone placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You and Lana were chosen by His Highness himself. Hold your heads high." Meanwhile, Lacey was freshening up when Halid, standing nearby, shyly asked, "Does my bathrobe fit you well?" Lacey replied cheerfully, "It was divine. Thank you." Inwardly though, she felt flustered, thinking, "I made sure to wash the poison from under my fingernails." She suddenly blurted out, "I mean, considering everything I've been through, it was truly heavenly." Halid blushed. "I am glad you enjoyed it." Remembering something, Lacey mentioned the peculiar behavior of the servants. "I'm not sure since I don't understand your language, but..." She recalled how they treated her like royalty, their faces almost reverent. Noticing this, she had thanked them, which only seemed to make them more enthusiastic. She told Halid, "They were incredibly kind. They didn't seem surprised or suspicious about me suddenly appearing as a consort." Halid chuckled. "You didn't like it? I ordered them to attend to your every need." Lacey sighed. "That wasn't the point." Halid then stepped closer. "Now that you're done freshening up, it's time I apologized." Confused, Lacey asked, "For what?" Leaning in, Halid said, "For failing to finish what I started last night." "Shall we pick up where we left off?" Lacey's face flushed. Your Highness. As I've mentioned, I'm not interested in anything without proper preparations." Taking her hand, Halid smiled. "Preparations? It's already been taken care of." Before she could respond, Halid kissed her, though she quickly protested. Wait, it's just the two of us in this small room." At that moment, Halid's hand wandered, lifting her leg as he buried his face in her hair, whispering, "How much longer do I have to hold myself back?" Lacey, blushing deeply, cried, "Wait, Your Highness. Hold on just a moment." She pointed at a creature on the floor. "What is that?" Halid asked calmly. "Oh, have you never seen a teru before?" Lacey gasped. A teru? A large tiger lay on a rug nearby. In Irina, unlike Weldon, magic was still very much alive. Those with magical powers could conjure guardians or teru from their mana. Halid explained, "I'm the only one able to conjure a teru beyond the border. Don't worry, Zeppi won't harm you. Shall we continue?" Seeing her hesitation, he asked, "You don't want to?" Lacey's heart raced. "It's more like I want to. I never knew embracing and kissing someone could feel this good." Before she could reply, Halid kissed her, a kiss she couldn't refuse. But there was a problem: she could fake love with her eyes closed, but intimacy was another story. "I've never actually done this before." She remembered a lesson from long ago. Acting is your job. Giving your heart will only lead to trouble. Steal others' hearts, but never give yours away. Snapping back to the present, Lacey pushed him away. "This is dangerous." Halid, puzzled, asked, "Sorry? I didn't catch that." She shouted, embarrassed. "I said I'm not interested in physical intimacy without magical contraceptives." Halid grinned, holding her hand. "But you already have it. One bracelet is enough to prevent pregnancy. Since you wore 3 when you went for a bath, I thought you were hinting that you wanted to sleep with me." Lacey gasped. But that's remembering the reactions of the servants. She realized what they'd meant. She had no idea the bracelets were actually magical contraceptives. Halid lifted her into his arms, grinning. "I was planning to do it on the bed, actually." Lacey, blushing furiously, stammered, "I want to add one more condition to our contract." She pushed Halid back. no unnecessary sexual intimacy. Halid looked puzzled. Unnecessary? Lacey clarified. I'll play the role of a blissful bride in public, but that doesn't mean I have to keep up the act in private. After all, this is a contractual marriage. Halid frowned, clearly displeased, but eventually, he relented. As you wish. Lacey quickly added the new condition to their contract and handed it to Halid, urging him to sign. And, could you come up with a name for me? A name? Halid asked. Lacey explained that Veronica was no longer suitable. Halid suggested she use her real name, but Lacey declined, as it was her way of protecting herself. Halid thought for a moment before suggesting, Neres, the goddess of the sea. Neres is nice. Lacey's heart raced as she heard the name. She liked it. She didn't quite understand this man or why he smiled the way he did, but she couldn't deny that Neres felt right. With that, she signed the contract, and so, Halid and Lacey's lives became bound by a contract of marriage. Will the Count find his supposed daughter in a distant land, and will Halid tame Lacey's heart before the contract's end? What do you think? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the next chapter of the Manhwa Lies Become You.